Welcome back to the big show. My name is James Howard. We ship pets internationally. If you find this video useful, go to the bottom and subscribe. And what we have is we have a podcast that's going to be happening in just a few minutes. I have with us Michael Davis, AE Peep, as well as everyone's favorite feline, Venmo, who's actually working on a transport to Korea, so he may not join us. In just a few minutes, we will be joining a podcast as it commences. We have on this podcast special guests from Portugal, Portuguese pet shippers who we partner with when we ship pets to Portugal, and they do the same coming back to the United States. What we discuss is mostly from the perspective of the importer. What happens over there whenever a pet arrives, the paperwork required, the time it takes, all the details. But what we want to discuss here before this podcast starts, and we'll chime in when it starts, is kind of what the Portuguese requirements are in the United States, because you have paperwork to do over there, paperwork that has to be done over there at destination, and paperwork that has to be done here in the United States. It's paperwork here in the United States is usually more involved. The paperwork over there is usually more behind the scenes, but the paperwork in the United States, we usually require the pet owners a little more of their involvement. One thing that I'd like to put out there is if you hire a pet shipper to transport your pet or pets to Europe or any other destination, sometimes the pet shipper in the United States won't include the costs of customs clearing, all the paperwork required on the other side. And sometimes they'll have the pet owner go and find someone. I would recommend not working with that pet shipper. It just seems like a lot of extra work, a lot more opportunity for confusion because you got a bunch of people's hands in this. So I think for the most part, pet shippers in the United States, if you hire them, they're going to hire the agent in Europe or at destination and just list one point of contact. And there's just less headaches. And then they'll include the price of the clearing in their price. And that's what we do. Michael Davis, who has extensive experience with European destinations, what are some of the requirements for Portugal?
Well, Portugal has relatively basic requirements that's identical to most of the rest of the EU, aside from Finland and Iceland.
Right.
So they mostly just need the rabies and a health certificate that is good throughout the entire European Union.
Right, and they share the health certificate. So EU, although Finland and some of those Scandinavian countries and some Eastern European countries may not necessarily be part of the EU, but as far as pet shipping, they do. And what makes them part of the same as part of it's being EU as far as pet shipping is concerned is they share the same health certificate. What about blood tests?
Only Iceland requires it in the EU.
Right. So there's a lot of Asian destinations, a lot everywhere actually, that non-EU doesn't require any blood tests except Iceland. You're not sure if that's technically EU, but it is in our case. But no blood tests of any kind. There's usually when they talk about blood tests, 95% of the time they're referring to rabies blood tests. And so none of that is required except for Iceland. And a lot of that has to do with Iceland. Again, I've mentioned this before, is a island country. And so they're really isolated because they're island and they're disease free. They want to keep it that way. So usually the requirements for island countries are a little more stringent. Japan's an example, Australia, New Zealand, a couple of those guys, some of those Philippines and Asia over there. The endorsement process for the EU is also similar endorsement. When we say that, that means the USDA needs to approve the health certificate. In 95% of the cases, there are exceptions with military sometimes. And also, I believe, transports to Mexico. But other than that, the USDA needs to endorse or approve. Michael, how does it work with with Europe at least and Portugal? You send the health certificate into the USDA electronically, and then where does it go from there?
So you have to submit a form, the health certificate form for the European Union. The USDA has to endorse it. They're going to stamp it, and each page that we stamped, so it has to be original. and it certifies it's an original, that gets sent back through either FedEx or UPS or your carrier of choice. We use FedEx.
Mhm.
It's to get sent
Either
back to
to
the
the vet,
original,
back to the vet, or to the pet
to the owner,
owner.
to the
Sometimes
owner.
we
The
send them
owner
to our
has to have
drivers.
that on hand. So
Right.
when it gets over to the airline, they take that same health certificate and they keep it with the dog so it can be with the customs once they arrive.
Right. So paperwork, basically they'll take all that. So paperwork goes from the to our computer. And you had mentioned that we take it over to the USDA, but I think we used to actually, believe it or not, or not that anybody really thinks about it, but we used to actually drive. Believe it or not, we used to drive that paper, I'm sorry, not PDF, but paper health certificate over to the USDA. There's one over by JFK. And there's one in Des Plaines, Illinois. They're in different locations. Sometimes they're near the airport. And we have to drive the health certificate over there to